wanted all of us to have a common jump-off place for understanding what's going on in the broader church. And so this is part of, it's adapted from what talk and presentation I do now around the country, 4 different churches. We call it C21 because it's the 21st century church. And we're going to talk about the 21st century church and how to transition, how we transitioned, how you have created this model of transition from bricks and mortar into being a more missional church. So for us, it's a time of developing common language because not everybody was here during the transition. Or if you went through South's transition, it was different from New Life's transition. Or maybe you were not a part of either organization, but it's a part of our DNA now. So we want to sort of recap a little. This year, actually this week, is the anniversary of us of South worshiping outside of the building for the first time and going to the Meadows. 5th anniversary, 5 years ago. And as Laura mentioned, we are in the 10th year, next year will be the 10th anniversary of the Acts of Faith model itself, which we started, remember, before we ever thought about leaving the church. So it's a significant time, and it's the right time for us to look at who are we in the 21st century. South was like most of our churches. It was like New Life. It's like, I want to say 99.8 or 9% of churches. We started the way many did as a church school in the 1800s, 1847, in our case 1820s for New Life. We had 900 members in 1960s, before the race riots in Rochester and before the Vietnam War that split the congregation. But as we all know, God is doing something different today and doing it in a different way than God did it 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, we're different. Certainly the church is. The changing world around us can sometimes feel a little bit like we're entering a maze. We don't know how to get through it, and how we get through it depends really on where we start. It depends on what we see around us. So part of Laura's and my job working as your shepherds, and my job and Firebird Spirit, which we'll talk more about later, our job in working with other churches, is to help people to figure out where they're starting. What do they see around them? We're all starting with a common understanding here today, or at least I hope we'll leave with a common understanding. We'll leave here with a sense of accomplishment for this church, the amazing things that God has done and is doing through us. And we'll leave here, I hope, with some common language for talking about all of this. Now, to put it in context, just so you know, the Presbyterian Foundation, who we work with, is the investment arm of the denomination, of the whole denomination. It is the largest church investment foundation, I think, in the world, certainly in this country. Jane Watt used to serve on the board for that, so she knows a lot more about this than I do. But here are some current facts, according to the foundation. In 2017, 2 years ago, the PCUSA, our whole denomination, lost nearly 68,000 members. 4.6% of our total. Some of it was natural attrition. Some of it was people leaving over the LGBTQ issue. Some of it was people leaving over other issues. And some of it was just not replenishing because no new people are coming in. In the last 15 years, the denomination has shrunk by 35%. But lest we feel particularly bereft of that, other mainline denominations are doing exactly the same thing. We're all about the same. Even the mega churches are losing members. 35 seems to be a prevailing number, not only because that's the number that we lost in 15 years, but now it's 35% of our congregations have 50 people or less. Think of that. 35%, over a third of our congregations are fewer than 50 people. Let me say that again. We have 10,000 congregations across the country. 35% of them have fewer than 50 members. Now, we have 5 worshiping communities. What are they? Name them. New Life on Monroe, Fellowship of Faith, Back to Center, South Heart, and Sunray. Those 5 worshiping communities, each one of them is under 50 in attendance, although Fellowship of Faith, if everybody came, who is normally part of that, we number somewhere around 60. But we'll say we're all under 50. But when you take the number of people who are involved in those 5 worshiping communities in any one week, we total about 120 in worship. So we have to think of ourselves kind of as a church of 120. All right?
It's a mid-sized church.
It is a mid-sized church in the denomination. In a recent correspondence with Paul Greer, whom many of you have met, Vice President of the Foundation, who's been working with us very closely, he pointed out that if we have our number of congregations, 1/2 of our members worship in 12% of our churches. Think about that. That means the other 50% are spread across 88% of our churches. No wonder the enrollment membership is low, right? And then 1/3 of the churches have 50 or fewer members. If you look at that blue line at the top, the royal blue, and extended that 88%, the average attendance across that whole line is 88. 88 people is an average attendance. We're over that, aren't we? We're 120. Only 157 PCUSA churches have 1,000 members or more. I did some research last night. Well, many of them still pretend that's not happening. Kind of what we did for a while, I think. Whenever we're helping other churches then to realize these facts and figures, they have to come up and face themselves in the mirror. They look at where they're coming from in terms of that maze. Where are they entering? And I'm here in part to remind them and us that perspective is everything. 1 + 11 = 10? No. And yet, I can guarantee to you that this is a true statement. Can anybody, now some of you have seen this before, so don't pipe up, but can any of you, other than those who've seen it before, explain how this is a true statement? It's new math. It's not new math. My hint is, think of it if you were reading Hebrew. Oh, sorry. Start on the right, go to the left. 10 = 9 + 1. True statement. The direction, that's right, Gordon, perspective, the direction that we're coming from changes whether or not something is true. We learned that along the way, didn't we? All of us in this room have learned that. I'm thinking about how initially both South and New Life, the one thing we said was we can never sell the building. We have to hold on to the building. We've had it for so long, it's our greatest asset. It was our greatest asset. It was also our greatest deficit and liability. So we have changed our perspective on that. Here are a couple of examples to prove my point. Is this man looking at the side or looking at you straight on? Yes. Or this one, we've often seen, is this an older woman looking down into her coat or a younger woman looking over her shoulder? before I go on, is there anyone who can't see the two men? That I should point it out to you? Is there anyone who can't see the two women? I'm happy to point that out too. The two women are hard? For the older woman, this is her nose, and this is her chin, and she is here. Yes, this is her hat. For the younger woman, this is her nose, and she's looking over her shoulder. Another point I like to make is that once we see it one way, it's kind of hard for us to see it the other way. But neither picture is either or. Both of these pictures are yes. They're both and. They're both things at the same time. And yet often our brains will prefer one over the other. Kind of like our churches. We get in the habit of seeing things one way. And then we have trouble seeing it the other way, even if we know it's there. My question for you before we go on is, do you think that's happening now? Are we so locked into one way of seeing our acts of faith, both as a totality or as individual acts, that we can't see any other way of doing it? You think so, Nancy? Say more.
Well, you know, we have an emotional,
I think we have an emotional investment in all of the ones that we have now. And so to think about any one of them dropping by the wayside is difficult because it would feel like a loss. Whereas if we added more, probably that would be regarded as a positive.
Well, we also have we also have the rule that if something doesn't work, you get rid of it and you move on to something new. So if we're going to think about that, I'd rather think that way.
You think about failing.
Sorry, I'm louder than I expected. I think just for a long time, we've also thought of ourselves just as this small little church, kind of just churning our wheels. And when you put it into perspective with all those numbers, like, we're much bigger than we've self-identified as for a long time.
I guess the question could arise, now that we have the acts of faith model, can we imagine something other than that? And I think it's important that we keep that in mind.
Great point, I think so too. Anybody at this table want to? Amy?
I think it's very difficult to be flexible enough in how we see our church. I'm very comfortable with change now that we have done it. Again, that was an act of faith to set this up. Yeah, I'm up for change, but I think as we're focusing on the other things, the Firebird spirit, whatnot, it's easy to just stick in this and put our attention somewhere else. So I might be getting stuck.
I think that's a very brave and very honest thing to say, and I think it's very human that we get comfortable and we like what's there, right? I don't think there's anybody here who likes change. Some of you say, I hate change, as if you're the only one, man. None of us really likes change. But we can get into the idea of transforming as opposed to just changing. Here's another example of what sometimes takes place. This waterfall is right in the middle of a street. People could fall off it if they weren't perched on the rocks. And if you're walking down the side of the street, I'd probably be like that person on the left sitting down. I mean, I wouldn't want to get swept away. But in this case, there's no real waterfall at all. It's a three-dimensional chalk painting on a flat surface. It's an optical illusion. We think it's one thing when it's another. We might try to avoid something that we could end up having a good time with. When it comes to our acts of faith or our deacons or our session, maybe we're afraid of doing something and we don't see it for what it really is. I don't know. I don't have anything in mind. I'm just throwing these things out. So let me ask you, are there some things now that maybe we are not seeing clearly? Well, of course, the answer is yes. We don't know what we don't know, right? But the way that we get through that maze that we're still in can only be seen if we change our perspective, like that equation, and if we look at things backwards and forwards, and if we're willing to see how more than one way of doing things could be right, that more than one thing exists at a time, if we admit that what scares us might end up being where we're supposed to be and not so scary, we might even discover that, well, God has a plan. So as Presbyterians, to sort through all those perspectives, that's who we turn to, God, through prayer and through Scripture. So let's pray. Holy source of surprises and joy, you have gathered your church in this time and in this place to open ourselves to the Spirit, to recognize what already is, and to imagine what is yet to be. We have come today, Lord, seeking your guidance, your reassurance, your inspiration, and your presence. Any one of us can count the number of seeds in an apple, Jesus. But only you know the number of apples in each seed. Only you know the outcome of our world. Only you know what we have been put here to do. Only you know where you are leading us. Only you know the outcome of our efforts. Send your Spirit to us this day, we ask. Send your enlightenment, your peace, your joy, your holy energy and excitement. For pray this, recognizing who you are to us. No, no, peace domine, domine. No, no, peace domine. Sed nomini, tuo da gloria. Not to us, O God, not to us, but to thy name give the glory. Not to us, O God, not to us, O God, but to thy